Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to Divergent Conversations.
We're taking a pause from recording new episodes for a while, and we're going to re-release some old ones. We've both talked about feeling like this podcast has been like flying by the seat of our pants, and we want to be a little bit more intentional with it.
We're going to re-release 10 episodes. See y'all in like 10 weeks. Just know that these episodes coming out are all thematic, and we selected ones that we think are really, really good. Hope that you catch things that maybe you missed the first time around, or maybe you didn't listen to the first time around.
Maybe it'll give people a breather to like catch up.
So this episode is just going to be a short overview on our own thoughts on ADHD before we dive into a series like we did for our autism series, specifically catering to ADHD, going through all of the criteria, sharing our personal experiences, and just kind of highlighting the overlapping differences between autism, ADHD as well. Hey everyone, so we just wrapped up our What is Autism series, our 4-part series, and now we are moving into our What is ADHD series. We're going to go through the DSM-5. You kind of have heard our thoughts on the DSM-5 already, so we're not going to jump back into that. We do want to just use the disclaimer, though, that we're going off of the DSM-5 and our own experiences. That does not mean this is going to encapsulate everyone else's experiences who are listening to this. That doesn't mean that if you don't check every single box of what we're talking about, that, you know, this is not a part of your reality. So we're just trying to be as general as we can right now. And we understand there's a lot of nuance here too, and a lot of overlap. Hell, a lot of misdiagnosis. And that's why you should definitely check out Megan's Misdiagnosis Monday series for her Neurodivergent Insights website, because those things will really help clear things up as well. With that being said, Megan, ADHD 101, here we go. Really glad we waited to episode 46 through 54 to do these series. So feels pretty much like us.
I know. I feel like, so yeah, my website is about, 2-3 years old. And I realized like, I don't even have like basics, like this is what autism is. This is what ADHD is. This is what a sensory meltdown is, like all that basic stuff. My goal for this year is to go through and like make that foundational stuff. Yeah. So I'm glad we're doing this. And it is funny that it took us 50 episodes to get here.
Here we are. So, I had mentioned to you before we started recording that your mic looks different. It's white. You bought some new stuff and some new software, and you were like, well, I wish I was recording, because this would be very ADHD of me.
Yes, it was like, so I often talk about how if you give a mouse a cookie, that children's book, that feels like my brain. It's a book where it's like, if you give a mouse a cookie and then the cookie wants a glass of milk, and then the mouse like sees the crayons and it wants to draw. That was this project of this mic. Was I wanted it to be white, so I bought it, and then I realized it wouldn't work with my computer. So, well, first of all, I accidentally bought 2 of the like bars, which was an obvious ADHD. What's the first criteria of inattention? Doesn't give close attention to details. And then it wouldn't work with my computer. So then I had to buy like a whole fancy setup to get the mic to work with my computer. And I had a big talk I was doing this week, which is partly what I was inspiring all this. So yes, it felt like a very ADHD project, which turned into a very expensive project, which the ADHD tax is real.
Yeah. Super real. I do like the look of it. I like the aesthetic, but yeah, super real. Cannot tell you how many times I've purchased something, and when I'm like really excited about it and I feel really stimulated by it, and then only to have to return it, cancel it, regret it, feel shame about the decision, and then there's a financial fallout or loss. So I know we're going to talk about that as we go through this series, but
yeah, I think the financial impact of ADHD, like Oh my goodness. I kind of want to add it up, but I also don't want to add it up. Like subscriptions, oh goodness. Between purchases to subscriptions to just all the things I lose. Yeah, it's a so this is someone in my community said this, so I'm not taking credit for it. They're actually on my autism, but you could say the same thing for ADHD of like, this is an expensive neurotype to have.
Yeah, fair. I know this is just on my mind because I just got back from doing that Spain retreat. And when I'm traveling, the ADHD tax is really expensive because I'll like commit to things. Either it's emotionally or financially, and then immediately have a reaction to it, or like very shortly after have a reaction and then have to cancel plans, or I have to cancel something that I can't get a refund. Oh, I booked this hotel because I was really excited about it, but now it's not in the right part of town and all the things. And then it's just, it's chaos.
Yes, I relate. I relate. Yep. Yep. Okay. So what is ADHD? We started our autism series with what is autism? What is ADHD?
Is that rhetorical or are you just saying that?
I'm like, well, if you
Asking me.
I am asking you, but if you're like, you can punt it back. But
I mean,
I am asking.
okay. I just wanted to make sure I'm following. So yeah, ADHD, we're talking about another neurotype, right? You just mentioned expensive neurotypes. We are talking about three different types. We're going to go into detail about all three types. I think that we still, as society, have some like stigma around what ADHD looks like. I think if we were to like poll 100 random humans and ask them like, what is ADHD? They'd probably describe like a young, probably white boy who was unruly, disruptive, like got up a lot in class, interrupted a lot in class, really struggled with their attention. I think where we would also hear like, oh, like squirrel. And then all of a sudden that's like where my brain goes. So those are two things I hear so often from just random human beings when we're talking about ADHD. But I'm thinking about how we're going to talk about like social struggles, attention struggles, um, the struggles with memory, with executive functioning, with the way that we organize information, the way that we really struggle to follow through on certain things when we get overloaded or overstimulated, the ADHD tax that we talk about, where there is fallout and there is shame and there is some spiraling that happens. So I think there's so much here, and there's so much that looks and overlaps with autism as well. Now I'm punting back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So much overlap. So much overlap. And yeah, there's so much. I mean, there's so much that you even listed there that's not part of the DSM criteria. Like, it's really interesting. And I know Europe, I think, has expanded their criteria that they use for ADHD, but there's so much that clusters with the ADHD experience. I mean, that's true for autism too, but that's just not even mentioned. Like, and I think that's part of what's unfortunate is it really gets the stereotype. It's like it's distractibility and hyperactivity, but it's so much more than that, right? It's like when I think about like it's time perception. That's, not even mentioned in the DSM. Um, when I think about ADHD, and a lot of this comes from Dr. Dotson's work, but I think about so I have an image in my head. Let's see if I can translate it to words. Like if I think about the kind of clustering of experiences that are core aspects of ADHD, I think about the interest-based nervous system, which we should do an episode like just on that. But that idea that when it's in an area of interest, like our nervous system can more easily engage because we actually have more dopamine when it's a area of interest, and dopamine means the neurons in our brain talk to each other faster. But things outside of our interest are really, really hard and painful for many of us to do. So like I think about that as a core feature of ADHD. Um, Emotional hyperarousal, and that's Dr. Dotson's language, but I really like it. At both that refers to like the kind of sensitivity to emotional experiences, but also the restlessness of like why it can be hard to sit through a movie. Um, and this can be both, right? Like a more profound experience of joy and delight, and also a more profound experience of the harder emotions. Um, Rejection sensitivity or rejection sensitive dysphoria, which we've done a whole episode on. That's definitely feels like a core feature of ADHD. And then I would add executive functioning disabilities. So in my mind, when I'm thinking about ADHD, I'm thinking about kind of those four pillars. I think that, and then there's kind of more, there's more stuffed in there, but those four definitely stand out.
Yeah, I think those four feel really paramount to ADHD and being able to put language to that in terms of what this experience is like. And it's so interesting because I reflect on this a lot in this podcast. Like you and I have talked about this. We're both autistic ADHDers. We talk so much about autism on this podcast and we've talked openly about like why do we think that is? And
Mhm.
you know, in our diagnosis stories episodes and our conversations in general, and I think when I received my ADHD diagnosis, like I was not surprised. I was just kind of like, this feels really fitting, right? Like I felt like it was really accurate. And I think that getting diagnosed with as autistic later in life was much more of a experience that I've had to really unpack for myself. And I don't know about how that has gone for you.
For me, it's flipped. I actually discovered the autism first,
Mm.
and I wasn't even thinking ADHD until I made my autism ADHD diagram. And then at that point, kind of what both my kids had been diagnosed ADHD at that point. Or no, one had, but we were suspecting the other one. And that was harder for me to see. And I think it probably speaks to the stereotypes of like school has always been hard for me, but I have worked so, like, I always worked so ridiculously hard at school. And I think there was something about the fact that I worked so hard at school and could persist in working hard that made it hard to see my ADHD, or the fact that for me, my strongest autistic trait is um, kind of interest and hyperfixation. So again, like I can have long periods of time where I'm like, I'm not distractible. So that actually made it a lot harder for me to see my ADHD. And I think I have more at this point, I have more imposter syndrome around my ADHD than my autism.
It's fascinating. So when you were, and that makes a lot of sense when you say it that way. So as you were like making this Venn diagram for ADHD and autism, were you just like, oh, yes, yes, yes?
Y- Yeah, I realized because, and whenever I make a Venn diagram, I'm reading a lot of the research articles, and what I realized is I was like, oh, things I was thinking was my autism, like that's actually an ADHD trait.
Right.
And so it was in doing that deep dive that I was realizing I was kind of overshadowing. Um, my autism was overshadowing my ADHD traits. Um, and so that's what led me down the rabbit trail of discovering ADHD.
It's interesting to start looking at it this way. And yeah, when you're saying like, oh, these things certainly it would make me not think that I am ADHD because I could sustain focus. I could do this thing. I could follow through on this project or get good grades in school. But I think again, going behind the mask or the curtain, it's like there's so much energy being used, right? To get good grades, to show up, to focus in class, to do all of the things that we probably had to do as kids and teenagers that we were just so not aware of at that time. And now looking back with that lens, you're like, oh wow, there was so much happening in order for A, B, and C to happen in succession.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is interesting. Like looking back at school, I mean, I have a few learning differences. Like I have uh, surface level dyslexia, which definitely impacted early learning. Um, but if I look back, I think it really is more. I think I was even attributing my school struggles to autism, but I think actually a lot of them was ADHD. Um, but yeah, I I didn't. I thought partly like I thought, and this is like I think a lot of neurodivergent people say this or feel this. Like I thought everyone was struggling as much as I was. Um, and working as hard as I was. And then it was in like forging close relationships and realized like well, other people in college weren't just like going to class and studying all the time. They actually like socialized and had lives and did things. Whereas for me, it really, my process through school has pretty much always been like you go to class, and then and even this, it's like I would go to class and figure out what I needed to learn, and then I'd go home and learn it because I couldn't learn from class. So it's like, okay, I think this is the big idea I need to learn. So now I've got to go either find a video or read some books or like find a way to teach this idea to myself. So I just spent a lot of time studying and learning.
Okay, so we just wanted to give a very brief introduction to our ADHD series. I know that episode was super quick, with us just talking about our thoughts on ADHD and what was coming up. We are going to start the process of going through the DSM-5 next week, criteria by criteria, and giving our own personal experiences as well. And we will see you next Friday.